Welcome to the New York Information Security Meetup. I appreciate you joining me. We're going to have some great conversation today, and I have the great pleasure to introduce Kurtis Minder, who's the CEO and co-founder or founder of GroupSense.
I've got some help, so there's more than just me.
And what we're going to do is we're going to have just an open conversation about the company, current events, and then the kind of the background for Kurtis, how he started, and hopefully we'll get a feel of who Kurtis is and what he's gone through so far to create the business. So why don't we get started? So if you don't mind, just provide us a quick overview, maybe not so quick. I think you've done quite a bit. So of your background, how you got into information security, and then what made you take the really deep plunge into opening up your own business, your own company.
Yeah, I'm gonna date myself, but in 1993 or so, maybe 92, late 92, 93, I was working in the basement of an early internet company when there was dial-up, and there were the octal. I don't know if you remember any of this, David, but there were octal cables coming out of clamshell modems made by US Robotics, sitting on garage shelves. And I was lucky enough in high school to get a job working at one of these companies. And very early on, before there was an information security industry, we had bad guys. And I was my favorite things to do was to comb through the logs, find them on our terminal servers at our different locations and things like this, and find ways to keep them out. And so that really started the bug on the focus on information security. So I played largely an engineering and operational role the bulk of the beginning of my career. I helped build two other internet companies in Illinois. And at one of those, as a side note, I built one of the very first online e-commerce systems for Prince. I actually was the architect behind Prince's selling his records on the internet in 1995 or something like that.
No way! Wow.
Yeah, I built, and that was before we didn't have Stripe or anything back then, right? We had to build all of that from scratch. It was all custom code. It was all very new back then. And I did that at one of the
Prince, the singer.
Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah.
So did you get a chance to meet him in person?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. That's a whole nother Fireside talk. But yeah, I knew Prince pretty well, and we built that e-commerce system for him. And of course, it was one of the very first sort of online transaction systems, and as a result, it was a huge target and a lot of risk. There's a lot of transactions going through this, and so security was key there as well, architecturally and also from a monitoring perspective. So then, yeah, go ahead.
How did you get to? I mean, that's fascinating, right? You hear sometimes that e-commerce website, and even singers sometimes. I know, like 50 Cent, for example, was one of the first ones to accept Bitcoins,
right,
for his song. So, Prince, you're doing e-commerce and doing e-commerce security for Prince is really fascinating. How did you get into doing that?
Again, I could tell a whole hour-long story about the Prince thing, but I actually knew him through other connections. I'd worked with him and visited his studio many times, knew his team and him casually through that, and pitched them on this. Actually, if you remember when he changed his name to Assemble and he was having a fight with his record company and he was trying to figure out how to distribute his records, I was helping him with that problem.
Wow, no way. Yeah. That's totally fascinating. Unbelievable.
It was a weird time, but it was fun.
So okay, so you started there, and then, but even beforehand, right? So did you always, had fascination with technology, or was this, were you always technical, or what made you move into the whole era of computers?
Yeah, when we didn't even have a computer in our house when I was growing up. Not really. I'll tell you, actually, honestly, I've told this story to a lot of people. Basically, it's this simple. When I was a kid, I went to my dad's work. My dad worked in a factory for Pillsbury where they process flour. And I would visit his work, and it was not climate controlled. And it was freezing in the winter. 110 degrees in the summer. He was lifting 50-pound sacks of flour from one conveyor belt to another, right? And then I went to my mom's work, and she worked for the state of Illinois. And I don't know what she did, but she had a cup of coffee in one hand, and she was typing on this typewriter thing in the other hand, and a little ribbon would come out. And I was like, I don't know what that is, but I'm going to do that. That sounds better. And so I at school, I took anything that had keys, keyboarding, formatting, whatever. I took classes because I was like, I want to be in the climate control thing with a cup of coffee in my hand. That's literally what got me. And so then I started applying for tech jobs. I was at my age, I was like one of the only people that young, pretty cheap labor that could type really fast and, understood computers enough. And that's how I ended up at the first internet company.
Wow,
and then what
amazing.
I did start to geek out on it. I had every opportunity to spend the weekends doing migrations of servers and things like that. So I volunteered to do that stuff for free because I wanted to learn and stuff like that.
Wow, that's amazing. So you basically, you knew what you did not want to do, right? Just by having the experience of your parents working different jobs. And then that motivated you to look into technology, basically. And then I guess you have natural fascination and aptitude, right, to learn it.
And it was, you think about the timing of that. It was like late 90s is when I started picking up steam in my career, and they let me come out of the basement from the internet company, and I actually got to work on the cool stuff. I got to talk to customers and build architectures, and that was right at the .com boom, right? So it's really started to take off. And, I just rode that wave. I went from the internet companies to working for SBC, which eventually, as you know, acquired AT&T up in Chicago. And I was the security subject matter expert for a 5-state region that used to be the Ameritech footprint. I don't know if you remember this, but before it became all one company again, it was all divided. And so that's when I moved from sort of operational security to where I was looking at logs and, configuring routers to more architectural stuff where I was building architectures for companies and hospitals and things like that, security architectures. And then I moved to startups after that. And I built a small MSSP in Chicago while I was working at SBC servicing small businesses. I built my own custom platform for it. It was like unified threat management before that was a thing. It was based on OpenBSD. It had a firewall, an IPS, a VPN concentrator, a mail server, all those things in one thing, and I would manage it remotely. So I did that while I was there. So lots of fun projects like that.
It's fascinating. And then somehow, at least from what my experience talking to a lot of founders, typically they come across a problem that they think that no one else solved or has, people have issues with it or companies have issues with it. And then they decide, okay, let's tackle that problem personally, right? Is that what you did? And maybe you can describe that problem, before founding GroupSense, and then maybe you can kind of review how do you guys solve it?
Kind of. It's the starting of the business, and I mean, a lot of the folks will laugh because it's like cliche stuff, right? It's like the stuff you read in the blogs, but it actually happens this way. So, I started the company with one idea. I got that idea from my friend Paul, who at the time was really concerned about privacy concerns. And the original business that I started was a data privacy company, which is very different from what we're doing today. And this is the very startup.
What year was this?
I started what originally was called Scatter in I probably started working on it in 2012 and then launched it in 2013.
So privacy back then, I mean, that's also very early. That's no one was talking about privacy back in 2013. I mean, now it's a hot topic, right? But back in the day.
And specifically like cloud storage data privacy. So one of the things that I was concerned about was that, if you store, and whether you're an individual or I hadn't decided it might go to market even, I just realized that hey, whether you're an enterprise or a person, you store your data in a corporate data warehouse somewhere or a cloud storage, that you're sort of at the mercy of that company. There's a lot of companies that say they're a privacy focused company, but it only takes one bad actor to screw that all up. And the company is an amalgamation of employees. And it's like, well, I got to trust all these people. I don't know if I do, and then all that. And then on top of that, there was the concern that, if they got a subpoena, they'd have to give that data away. And so I was like, well, let's just fix that. And so what I did was I wrote a prototype of what was Scatter that would basically do like what we now recognize as data sharding or data striping across multiple cloud providers. And that was the original business that we started. And it worked. The prototype worked. We had a couple of very large brand name customers using it as a beta. And then what we learned was, one, nobody wanted to give me capital for this business because I'd never done this before. It was pretty early for technology like this. So being based on the East Coast and specifically in Washington, D.C., which it's better now, but in 2013, it wasn't really a high-tech VC friendly city. I just couldn't get the capital, and to go from prototype to NASDAQ will put their production data on it was a very expensive endeavor. I was in a incubator with some other folks who were working on the project that is now GroupSense, and there was a cliche problem for them too. Two very technical individuals had built a very nice technical platform to solve the problem, which we can talk about, and had no idea how to acquire customers, or were not having a whole lot of success doing this. And so I started helping them with it, and I realized, hey, you got a real thing here. This is a real business problem. We should probably change the way you're marketing it, the way that you're pricing it, et cetera, but people will buy this. Then we basically merged companies, put the scatter thing on the shelf, and went to market with the intelligence business.
Interesting. So how did you get your first, few customers? And when did you actually know that this is aside from, figuring out, okay, somebody will buy it, to figure out, okay, I really have a business, in my hands that, I can go on and continue working on it?
Well, so these, the gentleman that I partnered with, I actually ended up acquiring their company and then making it into one company. One of them joined us. The other one went off to another project. They had a couple of customers, one, a couple of very small ones, and then actually they had one very large customer, a large manufacturer. And so we met with them and we asked them, like, why did you pay these two guys for this software? Explain to us why this is important to you. And they explained, they explained why the current tools weren't doing the job, what was unique about it, all these things. And so we took some of these things and we prototyped it. One example is we went to one way we got one of our other large customers. We went to a conference where the CISO was speaking, and we had run some intelligence reports on that company. And after the conference, we just handed it to him and said, hey, when you get a chance to read this, give me a call. And we didn't even stay. We just turned and walked away. And he yelled, hey, come back here. And so we came back and he goes, if what I'm looking at is this real? And we said, oh yeah, it's absolutely real. And he goes, okay, well, let's go in the other room. And so and we literally had a contract within a couple of days. And that was a major, Fortune 1000 company. So we're like, okay, we have something here. That's not the best sales tactic, by the way, in the long term, like the sort of ambulance chasing. But at the time, it definitely validated what we were doing, and we ended up getting a few more enterprise clients just from word of mouth from the systems, right? Interesting.
So maybe you can kind of walk us through the issue or the problem that you're solving with GroupSense, and specifically what's unique to you. How do you help your customers today? With their issues and kind of the security posture and threat intelligence specifically, just to bring everybody up to speed.
Sure. Yeah. And just a little bit of context from a threat intel perspective. I mean, this market's not new. It's been around for years and years. The core sort of function of threat intel is become, I would consider, commoditized, which is basically sending indicators that are known bad. So we know who the bad guys are. We know where the bad IP addresses are. We know what the bad URLs are. Feeding those almost mechanically and sometimes programmatically into your security systems, right? That's a typical use case for the traditionally threat intelligence. The next evolution of threat intel was kind of pioneered by companies like Eyesight Partners. I don't know if you remember those guys. They got bought by Fireside. Where they would have a team of former intel people, federal intel people who would build out teams and go actually infiltrate and learn things about what was going on in the underground markets and things like this. And then they would write reports on it. And usually those reports would be, they called them threatscapes, but there were a number of companies doing this. And these reports would usually be sort of vertical focused, typically. So they'd say like, okay, if you're, the reports say like, if you're an oil company, these are the types of attacks that occur in the space that target oil companies. These are the types of tools that those threat actors use. These are the bad guys that sort of operate those tools. There's tactics, et cetera, systems that they typically target. And these reports are very expensive. They would cost like $600,000, right? One of these reports. The problem with those, and we ended up becoming a big partner of Eyesight Partners and eventually FireEye after they bought them. The problem with those reports was they weren't very specific to the actual client. So, if they handed that report to Exxon would like shove it across the table and go like, it doesn't say Exxon in here anywhere, right? And I want to know who's, actually my CMO came up with this great quote, or he heard it and I'm stealing it, but he said like, there's a lot of bears out there. I only care about the ones that are chasing me, right? And so you think about the amount of information that like these companies are getting, whether it's threat intel or otherwise, that they have to triage from their SIMs, from their IPSs, from all these devices. They they don't need more noise. They need to know specifically what they need to target. And that just sort of goes back to the reason why intelligence exists at all. Why does it exist for a government, right? It exists to inform the government about where they should allocate their offensive and defensive resources. Works in the same way in the enterprise, right? So if you can tell where you're going to be targeted or why and by whom, you can target your very limited budget. And so what we were trying to do is basically do that very customer specific, and not just customer specific, but customer use case specific intel at scale with technology. And so, for example, while we do what I would consider a series of table stakes threat intel things, which are things like stolen credentials, exfiltrated data, people trying to monetize stuff they've stolen on underground markets, domain fraud, app fraud, all of those things are very common. We do all of those things. We also do things like infiltrate custom markets in China where intellectual property is traded for our manufacturing clients to look for their intellectual property, or infiltrate certain underground markets where they do illicit drug sales or trades on counterfeit drugs that would include our pharmaceutical clients' drugs and their names attached to them. So they're almost, it's threat intel, but it also sort of has evolved into sort of a business risk realm as well. And we're doing that with the platform that we started with. It now has grown up to ingest, not just dark web and dark net stuff, but social media and blogs and news sites and all these other things. And virtually whatever the customer needs, we can ingest.
So you're in the business of profiling bears, basically. So that there's the one that are, the ones that are chasing you.
Yeah.
So, people typically remember stories, right? I don't know if you have a success story you can share with us. Maybe kind of remove the company name, but it's not important. But for things that you brought up to a company and they were able to operationalize that and do something about it. So actionable items.
Yeah, sure. I mean, and these things I have a ton of these. The very recent one was a major company that we detected that someone had gotten access. They were actually trying to sell. A threat actor was actually trying to sell access to their network on an underground market. One of the challenges is with a pure software approach to this, which a lot of the companies in the space do. We do not. We have actual analysts that take the data from the software and make sure that it is what it is supposed to be. And for example, in this case, someone said, "Hey, look, I have access to this company's data, this level of access, and I'm going to sell it for X number of Bitcoin." Maybe that person does. Maybe they don't, right? So we are sort of operating in those underground markets with underground personas, things like that. We were able to approach the threat actor and say, "Prove it. Give me a sample." And they did. And the bad guy did a really crappy job of redacting some of the samples. And we saw their RFC 1918 addresses in it. So we were able to go to the customer and say, "Hey, this looks real. It's legit. We didn't know the threat actor, but we talked to them and we got a sample. And it looks like they're in your network." Come to find out, that was a ransomware operator, and they were able to cut off access literally minutes before he executed the ransomware on them. He had sold the access to the ransomware operator, and the ransomware operator is about to execute. They found all the files and everything for it. I don't know how much money that saved him. It's probably immeasurable, but that's good. The other thing is we do a lot of stuff for municipalities, large municipalities and state governments, and some of that stuff is what I would say kinetic intelligence. So we do look for sex trafficking operations and things like that. And anytime we save a human being as part of what we're doing, it just means a lot more. It's important to help the enterprise. But like when we hear about somebody getting saved from a SWAT team kicked down a door and saved some children, that's pretty amazing, and that happens too, right?
Yeah, that's incredible. So
Yeah.
tell me about people have, I believe, again, just from my personal experience, a misconception of what those underground forums are. What the size, what they combine from, who these threat actors are. Can you give us a quick primer? You mentioned you were kind of negotiating with a potential, with a hacker that kind of had a, hold of some data and, compromise in networks. Can you give us an idea of who are these people, how they operate, what are these underground forums, and so on?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so first of all, there's thousands of darknet sites. Out of those thousands, there's probably only 100-ish. I'm generalizing, active marketplaces. So there's some of the rest of those. They're like random sites. There's religious sites and all kinds of other stuff right on the darknet, and they're just websites. They're not marketplaces. So there's probably 100 active marketplaces. Out of that 100, and I know you've operated in the space. Maybe you'll have an opinion on this, but I'd say maybe 25 or 30 where most of the bad stuff happens, right? And where most of the bad, data is and or goods are sold. Those goods are either stolen corporate data, but there's also weapons, drugs. A lot of it is drugs. There's a lot of drugs transferring there. Just from an aesthetic, for anybody that hasn't been on a darknet marketplace, some of them look like eBay. They look very professional. They have ratings for the sellers, and all that. It looks very benign. That you're buying a grenade launcher or whatever, and it tells you the guy's rating, so the guy's got a good grenade. I don't know. It's a very strange aesthetic, but yeah, it's very, very well put together. Most of the marketplaces.
So do you have any grenade launchers?
No. I you know what? My team always jokes they're going to give me one for my birthday because they know how to go on. But yeah, so it seems it's very transactional. I think the trend that is occurring there, though, what we've seen is, and maybe you've seen this too, that it's sort of dumbing down the necessary sophistication of the threat actor. So there's things as ransomware as a service, right? They're like managed service ransomware. So you don't have to know how to do anything. You can just paint a target and they will do it, and you share the, that sort of thing. Loan fraud kits, there's a whole bunch of loan fraud kits for this SBA money, right? Where they built out the whole kit. And when I say kit, I mean, they had someone on the inside who could process the loan. They had the applications, they had the fake personnel information, they had the FEIN for the company, they had the bank that you could transfer to. They had it all figured out as a kit. And you just buy the kit, and then you share you're sharing the risk, so you share a little bit of the money with the kit manufacturer. And that's it. And so while there are certainly nation state actors, sophisticated hacking rings and ransomware operators, there is a trend now where we're seeing that the level of sophistication required to actually perform an attack is becoming less and less. You can just buy the tools or buy the service and do the thing. Yep.
Interesting. So how do you situate yourself as a potential buyer, as a persona on the dark web? And thank you for providing that insight in terms of, I think a lot of people think that hackers are all sophisticated, and you understand it's not the case. But so how do you establish a persona? Is this something that anybody can do potentially, or is this something that takes a long time? Give us an idea of what that looks like.
Well, I can't tell. I mean, there's some means and methods that I can't disclose about how to do that well, and not get kicked. You ultimately will get detected occasionally, but yeah, anybody can sign up for these sites. Whether someone will actually answer your questions when you ask them, or give you sample data is another story, right? So that's the thing is having not just a persona or a presence, but having a presence that has credibility enough to have a conversation if necessary. And so that's an art form. But anybody can sign up. I don't recommend.
So do you have to buy a few grenade launchers to basically prove capable and kind of prove yourself? Is that how it works?
So every market has a little bit different way of how they rate the buyers and sellers. Some is like the sort of democratic thumbs up, thumbs down from the users. Some of it's how many posts you make on the forum, how many items you've sold yourself, these sorts of things. The forums that you're referring to, where you have to prove that you're doing something illegal to get into them or something like this, they're sexy to talk about, but the practical use for most enterprises really isn't there. Now, what occasionally, there are these forums where you have to be vetted or in some way to get in. And what typically occurs in those forums that is interesting to an enterprise is hacktivism. Is one, so that's the places where like Anonymous is going to be like, I don't like the CEO of blah because he said something bad about blah, social stance, blah blah blah. Let's go get him, right? That's the type of data you can get, pending attacks or hacktivism. But even that doesn't occur that often, and typically now those guys are talking about that in some private WhatsApp group and not in those forums because they figured out that people know that they do that. What doesn't happen there is people don't sell enterprise data there very often. If you think about it, the bad guys are also trying to reach a total addressable market. They're not going to try to sell it in a place where nobody can get to, right? So they're going to go to the bigger marketplaces, which are relatively easy to monitor.
Speaking of to get to, do you require any special tools like a Tor browser to reach out these forums, or and also maybe you can talk about I'm assuming nefarious activity happens everywhere online, right? It's not just strictly in the dark net. I've viewed, I guess questionable offers on Twitter, right? On Facebook, whatever the case may be. So on Craigslist, right? So
yeah.
Do you care, or does the customer care where you find these? Is it things that are found in the dark web or carry more weight?
No. I mean that's a great question. No, it doesn't matter where these things are occurring. There are, take for example raid forums. I don't know if you're familiar with raid forums, but that's a major sort of illicit site. That's a normal site. You can just browse to that with your regular browser. It's probably hosted on some island somewhere, which is why it hasn't been taken down. Mostly there, they don't actually do transactions. They typically just dump enterprise data. But yeah, there's lots of sites like that. Pastebin sites are another example of that. Those types of sites that bad things occur. You don't require a Tor browser to get to them, but you should be aware. Yeah, and social media as well. Yeah.
So how do you, the web as a whole is a very large place, right? So how do you, collect, that information on a regular basis, and how you then filter it to make sure that only the key items that the company or the enterprise care about actually pops out, and then how do you vet that information to make sure that what you provide is not like false positives, or you don't cry wolf 50 times and there's only one time that is really a customer really cares about.
Right. I mean, that's the heavy lifting of the technology, right? Because what companies like ours are really doing is we're like Google for everything Google doesn't Google for, right? So that's like any kind of dynamic content or unindexed content or in underground markets, closed
You
forums.
could probably trademark that, right?
Exactly.
All the things that Google doesn't
Google for, yeah, exactly. And I mean, if you think about that I saw some statistic where it's like only, Google only indexes 4% of the internet. So that's a lot. That's a lot of data. And so, that is a hard technical problem to solve. And as you can imagine, every one of these sources of data is different. A tweet looks different than a marketplace, looks different than a forum, looks different than a chat room. And that data comes to us in all those different formats through our collection mechanisms. And so having a platform that knows how to ingest that data, normalize it, index it properly, pull out the actual structured data that is useful to the client, auto-enrich that data, correlate that auto-enrichment to make sure that it is like isolating the false positives like you talked. That whole operation, which we have patents on, is a pretty big deal. Eventually it comes down to like it gets mined up through the system, right, into the little gold nuggets that still get looked at by humans occasionally to go like, is this really what it's supposed to be? Yeah, okay, then we'll let it pass. Yeah, but it is definitely a technological feat.
And how do you deal with? I'm assuming you also monitor social media, right?
We do.
Okay, so the issues with social media, at least in the past several years, is they're starting to get like some sort of control over what you can collect and potentially report on. So how do you overcome that problem? And then I'm assuming that you have other areas of collection that you add as you go, right? So there are new forums, new websites. So how do you decide what to start collecting on?
I'm going to answer that in reverse because I think it works better that way. So like we have a very robust R&D team. Their entire mission is to make sure that we are collecting from the right things all the time. And as you know, the bad guys are moving around. It's not just Tor, but it's, they're operating in Discord and Telegram and OpenBazaar and all these other places now. So knowing where to be is also a bit of an art form. We have a team that does that. And once that team identifies, a source that maybe we should be collecting that we're not, we have some technology built into their browsers that we built that allows them to automatically start collecting from their browser the data there. That data gets funneled back to the same platform that I just talked about, and we build a configuration for the long-term collection mechanism off that data. So that could be any number of tools. They all have different names, and my developers will get mad if I say I'm wrong. But like, there's crawlers, harvesters, scrapers, personas. There's all these, and bots. So there's that. So on the social media side, I can't say exactly how we get around some of these things, but we have ways. We have ways to collect the social media data that we need, despite some of the limitations. It's a combination of some data licensing techniques, as well as we built some of our own sort of tactical collection, which we have to do this. We actually have, election monitoring and disinformation campaign monitoring contracts for some of the largest municipalities and states in the country. So our ability to collect Twitter at scale and make sure people aren't creating fake accounts or saying a polling station is closed when it's not, and all this other stuff that goes on during elections is important. And so we have to do it well.
Interesting. So, and what about, I heard somewhere, along the, my past work and so on, that sometimes it's a little dangerous to hang out on these forums without obfuscating your identity, that potentially that can backfire. How do you overcome that? And is this a true statement? Would you not recommend somebody?
It definitely can be. I mean, certainly you would want to take every precaution possible just in case. And we have over the years built a pretty robust, what we consider an OPSEC infrastructure around both our tactical operations and our collection infrastructure that obfuscates us from the actual source. But there's a lot of tech behind that. Some of it's pretty common stuff, proxies, VPNs, but there's also some dynamic, resource creation, things like that. It moves around from different cloud providers. They self-destruct if necessary. There's all this crazy stuff that we build. It's amazing.
So you recommend not to poke the bear, basically. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, don't poke the bear.
Or even if you poke the bear, you better have the bear behind the shield or behind bars.
This is the other challenge about being in this industry is, we're obviously, we market what we do. We're careful about how we do that, but we become targets, and my name is being mentioned in these forums because of blogs I've written and things like that. So it's, you're always a target. Kind of sign up for
that. And I'm assuming that at a certain point, let's say you come across an adversary with information and whatnot, would you, or potentially, in a ransomware case, would you also negotiate, with that adversary? Is this something you guys do? Maybe you can talk to us about what that process looks like.
Yeah, we do ransomware negotiations. They are stressful. We've done a few of them for companies.
Kurtis, do you personally do that? Do you personally?
We have some law enforcement folks on our team, but I also have run a few of those. I just finished one about a week ago, and so it's a bit of an art form. Of course, I think the thing to keep in mind when you're dealing with most of them, well, one, it helps to have an intel company do this, not just a random consultant, because knowing as much as possible about the threat actor, means, methods, operations, history, past, all this stuff, where they're located, all this data that an intel company would have is absolutely critical to the success of the negotiation. So knowing who you're dealing with, as detailed as you can, is important. And then, a very simple principle that I've always run these by is, for most of these folks, like the one I just did, which is a small Russian operation, not of kind of central Russia, those guys, you just treat them like businessmen. And you treat it like a business transaction. Now, there's a lot at stake. So you gotta, you've definitely gotta have some tricks up your sleeve, which I won't divulge, but you definitely need to treat them with respect and like a business transaction.
So do you pretend that you're part of that business, or what kind of persona do you
I usually, I mean, it depends on who we're dealing with. Single actors, sometimes I'll be the business, but when we're dealing with a threat group, I'll take the third party approach, and just let them know that I'm representing that company. And that also gives you a little bit of a foil, right? So I can't immediately answer any questions because I don't have the authority to do that. I can only represent what they told me last, right? And that gives me some time and that sort of thing. And so that's what we typically do. Yeah. So they know, but they know. And actually, it's funny that the last one I just did, this has never happened before. The guy goes, "Oh yeah, it was really good working with you. What's the name of your company?"
Maybe he wants to recommend you for the next incident.
And it was funny because he had a threat actor handle that wasn't too original, and I told him that. I said, "Hey, this isn't really original. Like I might run into you again, and you got to get a better." I was, it's funny that we were this casual, but this is the kind of conversation you have. And so when he asked me what my company name was, I just gave him his threat handle name, Inc. I was like, "Yeah, I'm not telling you who we are." Yeah.
Why? Maybe you could have referred some business your way.
Exactly.
Just think big. So there's a good question here, and I think that maybe that be of interest to some folks. So, I think that there's always that question. How does your data and your performance in terms of reconnaissance that you do differentiates from others in the space?
Sure.
Just in terms of better insight, and that's a kind of a intangible. Sometimes it's very hard to. Well, you can answer that question.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, you're right, and you've been in the space, so talking about the number of sources you have is really meaningless because what's a source, right? I mean, a single web page could be a source. It's really about efficacy, and the way that we operate as a company is fundamentally different than a lot of the players in the space. In that, most of the other sort of dark web intel focused companies are pure SaaS vendors. Where you just buy a license to their intelligence platform. This means that you need to operate the entire intelligence thing yourself as a company. And a lot of companies can do that. Large companies can do that. But it's not, you can't take the person that manages your firewall and tell them to run an intelligence operation with a SaaS tool, right? And so it's actually quite difficult to do this well. And so what we do is we actually have a managed approach. We have a team of actual intel analysts here in Arlington, Virginia, that help the customer. We build what we call PIRs on the front end, prioritized intel requirements. Those are those things that I talked about. There, obviously there's the table stakes things, but it's like, what is important to you? What does a needle look like to you as an enterprise? So all we're going to do is hand you needles. You don't have to worry about anything else. And then we check in every once in a while, make sure it's is the data we're sending you helpful, meaningful, operational, can you use it? And we just sort of iterate, which makes our customer relationships very sticky. We have like a 97% renewal rate over the last 7 years. So, but yeah, so it's just a fundamental different approach. But when we've done competitive scenarios and we've won, it's typically because of that very low false positives and basically having data that other folks don't have. And that's, just the collection strategy and the R&D team doing a really good job. Yeah.
Interesting. So, maybe before we ran out of time here, what have you seen, there's this, I guess, move to digital transformation due to COVID-19, right? So, right. Some of the threats have kind of escalated. What have you seen, maybe as a company, especially in the threat intel space, that you can kind of provide us insight?
I was gonna take a different angle with that because I think you were talking about threat intel a bunch, and I was like, I want to answer that differently. Do you mind if I take a different angle?
No, absolutely, go ahead.
Okay, so one of the things I think companies did. Okay, so first of all, we migrated everybody to remote working in like 2 weeks. It was amazing. Like everybody did they make mistakes? Did things break? Did threat, did home routers and VPN concentrators become a target? Yes, all those things. But generally speaking, it went pretty well considering how quickly everyone did it, right? And you're hearing stories about how productivity has gone up and all of these other things in companies. So generally a positive story. Before I go into my other item, I'll recognize the things that everybody else is talking about, which is like, hey, these people aren't in their corporate networks. They're not under the protection of that corporate network. Their data might be exposed. Who else is in their house? What are they doing with their laptops? All this other stuff is certainly a concern. I think that a lot of enterprises missed something very, very important. I don't know that enterprises are actually training people on proper work at home operational security. So, for example, right now, I'm in an apartment building in Arlington, Virginia, and the person behind this picture here can hear everything I'm saying, right? And the person on this wall over here can see. And the other day, there's somebody in my courtyard who had a conference call, and I know exactly how they're going to do this quarter and which customers are going to renew and which ones aren't, right? And so I think, it's not threat intel, but I think operational security and it's something as simple as, lower your voice, be careful what you're saying in a public place is important. And I think that got missed by a lot of enterprises. They don't realize how much of that stuff is being exposed as a result, right?
It's almost like going down to the basic, the fundamentals, right?
Yeah.
Put a password. Don't leave your laptop on. On
and reminding people. Yeah, the training you have to say everything 8 times, right? So just say it over and over again until it gets beat in. And OPSEC is really important. It's not just vocal stuff; it's papers, right? So don't leave papers sitting in the passenger seat of your car. Don't leave contracts sitting there. Don't I would walk down the street and see people's legal documents sitting in the passenger seat of their car. That's intel. That's bad. I shouldn't see that, right? And that sort of thing, right? Yeah,
very interesting. So, from your perspective, where is the industry going? And specifically, where you played, it's threat intel space. It's going to be just more collection, better data. I guess use of machine learning and potentially augmented AI.
Right.
Where do you see these the areas where you can play and become better as time goes by?
Generally speaking, so 2 things I think are sort of fundamentally shifting in enterprises and maybe have been for a couple of years. And that is, one is, due to the talent deficit in the space, which we still have, even though we've been training, schools have spun up programs, we've been training people, and more people are entering the workforce in the security space. Those people aren't as effective as the seasoned folks, right? And so it's going to be a while before those people are actually super, even though they're filling the jobs, it doesn't mean that they're doing those well all the time. And so there's going to be a delay there. And because of that, I think, the managed approach for technologies is plus the fatigue of how many tools, companies have. The managed approach is really is important. You're going to see a lot of outsourcing of, especially the commoditized components around security and network security. I also think that in the enterprise, and I've heard other people have spoken about this quite a bit, but we've shifted from the build a wall and keep them out to they're going to get in, right? We better have a plan, and that's where things like managed detection and response technologies are going to do well, I think, in the space.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So, just kind of to wrap up, what's the 1 or 2 positive tones, to the whole, COVID-19, and you kind of mentioned, the way that you managed to basically move the company to virtual. Any other aspect of it that you feel that have actually assisted you, and then maybe what you've seen from a customer perspective as well?
I think, like I said, the actual migration went pretty well. I think we learned some lessons really quick, and I think the enterprise security teams have done a decent job of adapting their enterprise traditional model to this remote work model pretty quickly. I think one of the things that we're going to see more of because of this, and companies have started to shift, is the first step was, hey, just move everybody to VPN, because that's what a lot of the companies had in place. I think that a lot of companies now are looking at that and saying, is that the best way to get them access to the data? So now there's these zero trust access type remote access technologies. I think we're going to see those take off, and those are fundamentally better than a VPN and backhauling all the traffic to the corporate enterprise, that sort of thing from a security perspective. So I think that's good. From a customer side, we saw a few enterprises hit pause and because they're worried about the economy and what that's going to do to their budgets, et cetera. But we've also saw an uptick, especially around anti-fraud and financials and things like this because of it. So it sort of balanced out. Most companies see the value in what we do as information security professionals is fundamental, regardless of the state of the COVID situation, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So where can people find you in the company?
Oh, well, we're based in Arlington, Virginia, but we're never in our office. So you're welcome to come to my apartment. It's pretty small. But you're at www.groupsense.io, and we're fundamentally focused on taking care of the enterprise threat intel problem on a daily basis.
Fantastic. So Kurtis, has been a real pleasure. I appreciate you taking the time to meet with the group, and I'll share this recording afterwards with the larger group, those who couldn't make it. And again, I appreciate what you do and your contribution to the cyberspace. And again, amazing story of entrepreneurship and the fact that you were working with Prince personally, that carries I guess a lot of clout with, especially with the 80s fan.
I got a lot of free music back then. It was good.
So somebody can hit you up and hear some more stories about that.
Right.
So thank you all for joining. I appreciate it. Looking forward to see you all next week. Take care. Thank you all.